Blog Talk Radio.
Mi chiamo Afuraitkaitnit, Neye AMANSEM da, Medinde Ojirafo, Kwesi Ranehmpata Akan, Akwamumana Maruka Etifi Mu Ojirafo, Ojiramai Mu. Greetings to all Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people, many Africans, black people. Today is AMANSEM Day, Affairs of the Nation Day. My name is Ojirafo Kwesi Ranehmpata Akan, Ojirafo of the Akwamu Nation in North America, within Ojiramai, the purified nation, Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit people in the Western Hemisphere. Dare I say we thank you once again for tuning into the broadcast. We've opened up the chat room. If you have any questions or comments in the chat room, you must log in as a user in order to interact. If you have any questions or comments on the phone line, hit the number 1 so that we can see that your hand is raised. We have 4 broadcasts on a weekly basis. On Joda, Monday nights, we have Akanfo Nanasom, Ancient Authentic Akan Ancestral Religion. We deal specifically with the Akan expression of Nanasom, of ancestral religion. First and foremost, because we are Akan. Secondly, because of the misinformation which has been propagated regarding Akan cosmology, Akan ritual practice, Akan religion, Akan spirituality, not only from people in the Western Hemisphere who have been misinformed, but also from those on the continent of Afuraitkaitnit who have been infected with white culture, pseudo-religion, pseudo-philosophy, and so forth. And those infections have been woven into the fabric of their presentation of Akan ancestral religion, and therefore that presentation is infected as well. So we deal with ancient, authentic Akan ancestral religion. Deals with our ancestral inheritance going back to ancient Kamit, the ancient Kan land, ancient Nubia. Our people migrated, some of our people migrated from ancient Kamit, the Nubian Empire, to the western part of the continent a couple of thousand years ago after the fall of Kemet and portions of northern Kamit, northern Nubia, Sudan, migrated to the western part of the continent, reestablished the Kamit Empire, or the Empire of Ghana. After Muslim invasions, 1,000 years later, some of our people migrated further south towards the regions of today's Côte d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, and Republic of Ghana, and reestablished Akana civilization in that area. Hundreds of years after that, some of our people were taken from those areas and forced into North, Central, South America, the Caribbean, and Europe during the Musuo Kessier, the Great Perversity, the enslavement era. And this is how some of Akan people, some of us, ended up in the Western Hemisphere. But we maintained our ancestral religious tradition, our Akan ancestral religion. So thus we have Winti, which is the Akan religion in Suriname, South America, Obia, the Akan tradition in Jamaica, and Hoodoo, which is Akan ancestral religion in North America. Hoodoo comes from the Akan term Ndu, meaning plant life, trees, roots, and so forth, medicine from plants, plant life. It also means to become heavy with the spirit, bringing the spirit down through spirit possession and communication. And of course, we've shown in our book, Hoodoo People, that the term Undu, which the term Hoodoo comes from, can be found in the language of ancient Kemet and Kanat as well, also meaning medicine, also meaning to become heavy with the spirit, medicine from plant life, and so forth, to become heavy with the spirit. It is also a title of ancient Nubia, the Undu land, and the people called the Undu people. The reason we named the book Hoodoo People and so forth. So we deal with ancient, authentic Akan ancestral religion, inclusive of its very expressions in the Western Hemisphere, which of course includes Hoodoo. On Abinada Tuesday nights, we have Ojira, which means purification. Purification in the language of ancient Kemet. It also means to celebrate a ceremony of purification. Ojira means purification in the Akan language. It also means to celebrate a ceremony of purification. We purify concepts, purify cosmology, purify the understanding of ancestral religion, purify literature from ancient Kemet, Kanat, as well as orature and ritual practices and so forth of our ancestral religious traditions, not just the Akan, but all Afuraitkaitnit traditions wherever we exist in the world. We have maintained our traditions through our spirit-genetic blood circles, even into the Western Hemisphere, so we're not dependent on anyone outside of our direct spirit-genetic blood circles to practice our ancestral religion. We have maintained these traditions intergenerationally and transcarnationally through successive reincarnations for over 300 years since we've been in the Western Hemisphere. So Ojira means purification. Ancestral religion, in essence, is the ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance. That means through ritual we incorporate those things, objects, deeds, and entities we need to incorporate in order to harmonize our thoughts, intentions, and actions with divine order. And through ritual we reject those things, objects, deeds, and entities we need to reject in order to restore balance to our thoughts, intentions, and actions, and thus realign ourselves with divine order. So the ritual incorporation of divine law and the ritual restoration of divine balance are the expansive and contractive poles of ancestral religion. We state that Ojira, purification, operationalizes Nanason, ancestral religion. Purification operationalizes our practice of ritually incorporating divine law and ritually restoring divine balance. It is through this means that we are able to live our culture, our amamre, our way of life, which is to execute our divine function in creation harmoniously. In that process, we align every thought, intention, and action with divine order every moment of every day. And when we make legitimate mistakes, then we engage the ritual process to ritually restore balance, ritually incorporate law, and ritually restore balance so that we can get back on track with aligning every thought, every intention, every action with divine order every moment of every day. Our ancestral culture, Afuraitkaitnit, or African ancestral culture, is the divine law, love, or order, the divine acceptance of order, and divine rejection, the divine hate of disorder and its purveyors. These are the expansive and contractive poles of culture, or amamre, our way of life. We incorporate that which is orderly. We reject, repel, hate, repulse that which is disorderly, which would take us out of divine order. So, again, we engage in that purification of cosmology, culture, ritual practice, knowledge of the divinities, the ancestresses and ancestors, and various other things on that Ojira broadcast. On Awukuda Wednesday nights, we have Egua Marketplace, where we showcase Afuraitkaitnit businesses, organizations, and institutions who are serving the Afuraitkaitnit community, those who maintain their ancestral religious values, which inform their service to the community. We have individuals come on and showcase their work, their businesses, and so forth. We also talk about the philosophical foundation for our Okom economic development model, which is an approach to economic development rooted in our ancestral religious values. Therefore, a holistic moral approach to economic development that benefits the entirety of the Afuraitkaitnit Oman or nation. So we deal with that on Egawada Marketplace. Tonight is Yauda, which is Thursday, also called Yada Abada Thursday. We have AMANSEM, Affairs of the Nation, Affairs of the Oman. We're dealing specifically with issues that confront the Afuraitkaitnit or African Oman nation, specifically Ojira Oman, the purified nation, Afuraitkaitnit people in the Western Hemisphere. The term Ojira Oman, Jira means purification, as we said, in the language of Ancient Kamit, as well as the Akan language. Oman means nation. It also means west, land of the setting sun. It means that in Ancient Kamit, it means that in the Akan language. So Ojira Oman means the purified, Ojira Oman, nation, mind, land of the setting sun, the west. We are the purified nation of Afuraitkaitnit people in the west, the extreme west, the land of the setting sun. We talk about AMANNE on this broadcast, which is nationism, which is the purification of nationalism. Our approach, a proper approach to nation building, restoration, our mindset has to be rooted in this proper understanding of AMANNE or nationism, the purification of nationalism. We recognize an Oman, a nation, to be a living, breathing entity. governed by specific abosom, orisha, vodou, and so forth. We are cells within that organal structure. Just like you have an organ, and the cells, which are the children of the organ, operate within that organal structure to support the organ's functions. They work together interdependently. They receive their nutrients and so forth. They function harmoniously and interdependently to support themselves and their functions, but also to support the greater entity of which they are a component part. The deities are the organs within the great divine body of the Supreme Being. We are the cells within that great divine body. When we're drawn into a specific region of the Earth Mother's body, we are in the Western Hemisphere, a specific region of the Earth Mother's body. At some point, our ancestresses and ancestors who are spiritually cultivated, our Nanano Nsamanfo, direct us to coalesce in a specific region of the Earth Mother's body. We blend ancestral blood circles in that region, drawing in ancestors and ancestresses to be born back into the world, blending ancestral blood circles, interfacing with the Earth Mother, Asase and the Earth Mother, Asasiya, the two Earth Mother divinities, in this specific region of the body, dealing with and interfacing with the specific manifestation of the abosom, the orisha, the vodou, the forces in nature as they manifest in their unique capacity in this region of the Earth Mother's body, interfacing with the plant life, animal life, mineral life in this region of the Earth Mother's body for medicine, but also for food, taking that into our system and affecting our cells and development and so forth. That coalescing in the region, blending of ancestral blood circles, infusing the energy of the unique manifestation of the divinities in this region, including the Earth Mother divinities and so forth, that affects us in a fashion where we develop and forge a locative identity, a unique identity based on our unique blending of ancestral blood circles in this region of the Earth Mother's body and incorporating this unique expression of energy into this coalesced group of people. We are Ojiraman, a purified nation in the Western Hemisphere. We have our own expression of our ancestral religious practices, but we also have our own expression of how we need to address any issue that confronts us as an Oman, as a group who are part of a larger organ structure governed by specific abosom. When we are harmonized with the abosom that govern our organal structure, our Oman, our nation, then we can make proper decisions that are harmonious for us individually as well as a group. So we have a nationist perspective, a holistic approach to nation building. There's no such thing as a secular nationalism. That's a European approach to nation building and so forth. We have an Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit grounded approach to nation building based on our cosmology. Use that perspective, that holistic perspective, a nationist, not a nationalist, but a nationist perspective when we're dealing with issues that confront us as an Oman. One of those issues, of course, is the akyiwadefo, the spirits of disorder, the whites and their offspring. And of course, achi means to hate. Adie means thing, object, deed, or entity. Achi, de, and akyiwadefo are the people, individuals, foe, who are akyiwadye of taboo, divinely hated, divinely restricted, divinely rejected by the abosom and nananom unsamanfo, the deities and ancestral spirits, as well as the Supreme Being. That's a designation for the whites and their offspring, spirits of disorder. They incarnate as spirits of disorder without exception. Whether it's white Americans, white Europeans, white Hindus, white Arabs, white Asians, white Hispanics, white pseudo-Native Americans who are just Asian invaders, white Latinos and so forth, non-black people are akyiwadefo, spirits of disorder. They incarnate as spirits of disorder without exception. All of them who have existed in the past, all of them who exist now, all of them who will exist into the future until we make them extinct, without exception. Incarnated spirits of disorder. So there's no harmony with spirits of disorder. We do not seek any harmony with spirits of disorder. They are the cancerous cells in the body of black humanity, which only deserve eradication and expulsion, not any form of unity at all. So these spirits of disorder, quite naturally or unnaturally, according to their nature, have been forcing for years. Of course, they've been engaged in this process for thousands of years because it's their nature, but forcing for years this dissexual, homosexual agenda war, trying to force that perverse death style on Afuraitkaitnit people because they know that disrupts families, disrupts relationships, creates spiritual discordance within the minds, spirits, and clans of people and so forth. So they seek to disrupt our family structures, disrupt our social structures by promoting this perversity. No different than promoting heroin, crack cocaine, all kinds of other drugs, addictions, criminality. The whites and their offspring always seek to promote disorder. They are cancerous cells that seek to consume and destroy all of the healthy cells in the body. If you allow cancerous cells to proliferate without arresting their development, they will metastasize, the cancer will metastasize and expand and spread throughout the entire body and take the entire body out. The way you deal with cancerous cells is not to unite with them, but you isolate them and you kill them, you exterminate them, and expel them from the body. They themselves and the way they operate, meaning their way of life or way of functioning, malfunctioning, dysfunctionality, their way of life, their culture is a manifestation of their nature, which is disorder. The manifestation of the akyiwadefo, the whites and their offspring, the manifestation of their culture or way of life is disorder, which is their nature as spirits that incarnate as spirits of disorder. So, of course, they're going to promote the perversion of the divine life force energy that brings life into being. Of course, they're going to promote dissexuality, homosexuality, because they are perverse beasts by nature. There's no difference between dissexuality, homosexuality, bestiality, and various other forms of sexual deviance. And, of course, the whites and their offspring promote all of that. So they've been waging that war against our people and have intensified it, of course, in recent years. Of course, they used the cracker in tan-skinned Obama, who is a child of his white mother, a spirit incarnated through the white mother's line, a white deceased relative of the white mother who was drawn into her womb because she copulated with a black male. That white spirit of her great-grandfather comes through the womb, through that united sperm and ovum, and because it's the zygote of a quote-unquote biracial individual physiologically, then that white grandparent of hers comes into a light brown body and is born looking like a quote-unquote mulatto, but that's the same white grandparent of hers operating through that tan body, a spirit of disorder. That melanin-dominant body will not give that spirit of disorder a divinity, a deity dwelling in the head region, which is the difference between our people and all other non-black people. So they used him, of course, and he was glad to do it because he's a cracker, to promote dissexuality. That was the major reason he was hoisted upon us, so we could accept all kinds of sexual deviance with open arms. Talking about transgenderism, talking about letting faggots and so forth use the bathrooms of other genders and so forth. This is all promoted by the whites and their offspring through one of their surrogates, one of their agents, Obama. And, of course, when he's having the My Brother's Keeper initiative that had nothing to do with assisting in the development of black men, raising them up. Of course, it was black males, but then they also had Hispanic males as well. The point of My Brother's Keeper was to promote, quote-unquote, same-sex marriage or marriage equality in the black community. The program is run by dissexuals, homosexuals. We use the term dissexuality because dis means not. So it means that sexuality in the real sense is not actually happening. Sexuality can only manifest between the Afurakani male and Afuraitkaitnit female of the proper age. Anything else, males and males and females, that is not sexual activity. That is dissexual activity, is perverse. Now, of course, they've been forcing that perverse agenda on our people, no different than forcing crack cocaine and heroin and other drugs upon our people to destroy our people. Of course, we have a response for that, but we have to be intelligent with regard to our response. We don't just protest. Protest doesn't do anything. Quote unquote, speaking truth to power, that's meaningless. That's like someone talking back to the slave master, but 10 years later they're still on the plantation. Talking back is not revolution. It may seem like that at first, the first time someone who is enslaved stands up and says, I'm not doing any work anymore. If that's followed up by killing the slave master and his wife and his children and his staff and freeing people from enslavement, then that talking back led to action. But talking back in and of itself, which now is cached as speaking truth to power, but at the end of the day, you're still under the subservience of the cracker culturally and mentally and so forth, then it's meaningless. And protest is meaningless if it's not followed up by immediate action. So protesting against dissexual homosexual activity and the dissexual homosexual agenda is not going to stop them, obviously. We have to have a method to actually stop it. It's no different than drug addiction. The whites and their offspring have forced crack cocaine into our communities. They flooded our communities with marijuana, flooded our communities with heroin and other drugs and so forth, as well as cigarettes to destroy our people and alcohol and so forth. You don't just protest and preach and hold signs picketing saying you shouldn't be sending these poisons into our community. That's not how you stop anything. These are criminals. The first and foremost, if someone's addicted to drugs and you're flooding the drugs in the community, first you stop the flow, but you transform the people. You help them overcome the addictions. That's revolutionizing and resolutionizing the process. You're engaged in revolution and resolution when you turn them against the enemy who's trying to force that poison on them. If you just allow the whites and their offspring to destroy the community through drugs and so forth and just give up and say, well, whoever takes drugs, they're just going to die and that's it, and we're just going to protest and hopefully they'll stop killing more of our people, that's ridiculous. You establish methods so people can overcome those addictions and defeat those addictions and never go back to those addictions. That's the first phase to actually repair the people. Then, of course, you fight the enemy, and ultimately the enemy must be exterminated. And people must be educated on who the enemy is and why they're actually flooding the community with drugs so people will recognize the reality, and instead of accepting the enemy, they reject or hate the enemy. This is why we talk about divine order. It's composed of two complementary poles, Madanechi, divine law, love, and divine hate. There are deities of law, Ma'at and Ma'at, the male deity Ma'at and the female deity Ma'at. And the word law and love is the same word in our ancestral languages. There are male and female deities of hate, Erubedeti and Sekhmet, also called Benan, Apenna, in Akan, and so forth. The expansive and contractive poles of divine order. We incorporate what we need to incorporate through law. We reject or repel what we need to reject or repel, eliminate through divine hate. You incorporate things within your system through the respiratory system and circulatory system and so forth. You take in oxygen and nutrients and food and everything else, digestive system, bring these things into your system so you can generate some energy and fuel and everything else. But then you also reject the parasites through your immune and lymphatic systems. You destroy cancer cells, you kill them, isolate them, kill them, and expel them from the body. Those are the agents of the divine hate in your body, the immune and lymphatic systems, which are governed by Benna and Abena, Herubedeti, and Sekhmet. The same thing goes within our communal body. The deities of divine hate are operant within our communal body. They're part of our ancestral religious culture. They're operant within the great divine body of Supreme Being. We attune to those divine forces of hate, repulsion, rejection, so we can repel what the whites and their offspring are putting forward. We don't accept their foolish philosophies. We don't accept their perverse commodities, drugs, and so forth. We don't accept their perverse behaviors. We don't just assume that we have to tolerate them and try to incorporate them and look past them and not speak against them and so forth. We don't accept what they're forcing on our people. We reject it. We repel it. We destroy it. That means what they give, whether it's ideas, but also behaviors, also substances, whatever it is, we reject it, we repel it, we eradicate it, exterminate it. So we have our Coco Bowl movement. And of course, we started this Coco Bowl movement a couple of years ago as far as a movement. And when it comes to the publication itself, we published this a number of years ago, back in 2013, so-called 2013. We published our book, Coco Bowl. Coco Bowl is a term that means warning in the Akan language, and we compiled 4 different articles that we published into one volume. Of course, the whites and offspring, first and foremost, when they're trying to force us to accept intellectually the perversity of the dissexual homosexual agenda, they try to brainwash you into believing that we've always been engaged in this, and therefore it's natural and we shouldn't be rejecting it. In fact, the only reason people in Afuraitkaitnit or Africa reject it is because Christianity and Islam came in, and those are Christian and Muslim values, but in traditional African culture, we've been engaged in homosexuality forever, which is pure stupidity. It's a straight lie. And of course, the spirits of disorder, these criminals, will always seek to lie about our culture because they're trying to force that nonsense on our culture. And one of the ways they attempted to do that, out of the thousands and thousands of texts of Ancient Kamit, covering thousands of years, they found a handful of texts, about 7 different texts, and tried to promote these as representing an acceptance of dissexuality, homosexuality. We prove in this book, and we show these texts and show that actual translations and prove that every one of them are actually a repudiation of dissexuality, homosexuality. So one of the articles is the divine prohibition against dissexuality, homosexuality in Ancient Kamit, where we show in the Medutu, show in the so-called 42 enunciations of Ma'at, the divine prohibition against dissexuality, homosexuality. The next text, Niak Kanum and Kanum Hatep, who are actually identical twins. The whites and offspring tried to say they were the first gay couple. They're actually identical twins with wives and children. And we show that, of course, we show the text Set and Anat, the dating of the contendings of Heru and Set. Dissexuality, homosexuality was never accepted in Kemet. The whites and offspring try to utilize this text to say that homosexual activity was accepted in Ancient Kemet, and showing a reference to Set trying to sodomize Heru. And we actually show that in the original text, Set tried to rape the seed goddess, and when the whites and their offspring rewrote the text, they took the seed goddess out of the text and stuck Heru into the text, and we prove that. And we show the time stamp because foreign deities, quote-unquote Canaanite goddesses or quote-unquote misnomer Semitic goddesses, show up in the text. And when the foreign deities show up in the text, incorporated as children of Ra, which of course originally these foreign deities are not children of Ra, shows that that was a time period when the foreigners had taken up residence in northern Kemet and forced their images into certain texts that were written at the time, forced their images and their perverse cosmology into the original text of Kemet. So we show the original text and how the seed goddess was taken out and Heru placed in, and then this whole notion of sodomy was pushed by foreigners, the whites and their offspring, which had nothing to do with our people. And then we deal with the instructions of Ptah Hetep, which is a proper translation of Instruction 35, the prepubescent sexual taboo, which is what this portion of the text is talking about. Many translators could never properly translate this specific instruction. They thought it was a embrace of dissexuality between two males, and in reality, it's actually describing the taboo against prepubescent sexual activity, meaning a male trying to have sex with a female who is underage. There's a taboo against that. Of course, the Instructions of Ptah Hetep is the oldest quote-unquote book in the world. So in the oldest book in the world, we have a taboo against an adult male trying to engage in sexual activity with a female who is underage, who is not yet a woman. So we go through that information in this text. But then we also did a couple of broadcasts, and we created a page, and we're going to put the link to the page up in the website or in the chat room real quick. You go to the Coco Bowl page on our website, on odridapo.com/CocoBowl, KOKOBO.html, and we'll put that link in the chat room right now. We not only published that text a few years ago, and of course, when you study that and you study the information of the text, we're going to go over a portion of it. It proves conclusively, number one, that dissexuality, homosexuality was never accepted, not only in Ancient Kamit, but in Afuraitkaitnit, Africa, anywhere, at any time in our true history up until this very moment. Because we understand the balance of male and female. We understand what disorder and criminality is. So we've never embraced disorder. We don't embrace criminality. We don't embrace sexual deviance, sexual perversion. Never have, never will. It's not part of our cosmology, and it never will be. No different than pedophilia or raping children is never part of our cosmology. It never has been and never will be. It's never going to be a time when that changes because it's criminal. It's disorder. It's not a belief that is disorder. That is disorder in and of itself. So it's dissexuality and so forth. So we prove that, and when you have this information that proves that conclusively, that's the first step towards reorienting the minds of our people to not accept this dissexual agenda. First, they have to make you believe, just the vast majority of population, that accepting dissexuality or homosexuality is natural because some people are just born like that, which is misinformation, and sexuality ranges. It has a wide spectrum, and it's not just male and female and just based on gender and all of this misinformation, these perverse studies, all of this nonsense that the white offspring put forward. Some of our people fall into the trap of actually believing that, actually accepting it as though these perverse beasts are experts in some capacity dealing with human sexuality or relations or anything. The whites and their offspring are spirits of disorder. That's how they incarnate. When you understand ancestral religion and cosmology and culture, you can identify them as spirits of disorder. So anything they put forward, any ideas they put forward, any behaviors they put forward has nothing to do with us because these are criminals, cancerous cells. They only seek to pervert and destroy. If cancerous cells could speak and they started moving towards healthy cells and tried to convince them to go along with their way of life, the healthy cells would identify these are cancerous cells who are seeking to consume and destroy. So we don't listen to what cancerous cells say because they are cancerous cells. Our only response to them is to kill them, not listen to them, not embrace them, kill them, exterminate them. That's the only solution, and that's the only solution we desire because we have no desire to interface with them, be with them, embrace them on any level. They are repulsive by nature. Like two magnets on a table with the same polarities facing, they repel one another. So when you first can utilize proper information to destroy the false historical narrative that they put forward and the false cultural narrative that accepting dissexuality is okay because it's always been accepted, the first thing you have to do is destroy that whole notion. And we destroy that with our book. But then you have to get into this notion of how do people get involved in the behavior. It's a very small percentage of our people who start off getting involved in that behavior because of an intellectual argument, which the whites and their offspring put forward, and they put it in the various schools and so forth. They're trying to teach children it's okay to have two daddies and two mamas and so forth. And from the time they're in kindergarten, they're pushing the dissexual homosexual agenda with images and stories and everything else, trying to groom our people, just like a pedophile grooms a child. The whites and their offspring in the so-called school system, they're trying to groom the children from the earliest ages, even in kindergarten, accepting dissexuality and homosexuality. The target is black people. The whites and offspring are already perverse. That's their nature. The target for the dissexual homosexual agenda is our people because they know that's the most disruptive kind of behavior for our community, for our families, and so forth, and they would like to destroy our families from inside out. So, first you have to understand that it's not only the intellectual piece that gets most of our people involved in that, those who get involved in that. The majority of the people who get involved in that perverse death style, not a lifestyle but a death style, some of them are lured into that by intellectual argument. But the vast majority of our people who get involved in that is through child molestation. 80-90+% of our people who get involved in that perverse behavior, they suffered some form of trauma, verbal abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, domestic abuse, and so forth, and then they were confused ever since. So once you can deal with that reality, and they can deal with that reality, they can actually reverse this process. This is the key, the ritual key, because we talk about eradicating dissexuality, homosexuality through ancestral religion. The whites and their offspring have put forth this intellectual debate and put forth this narrative that once you get involved in that kind of behavior, it's because that's who you are naturally and genetically, and you just need to embrace who you are, and if you have any desire to go against that, you're just rejecting your true self, and you're having psychological problems, and you need to be convinced by a therapist or a counselor and so forth that you really should be a homo, and you're just fighting against it because society doesn't want you to be yourself, but you have to reject what society is saying because that's, comes from Judeo-Christian values, which actually Judeo-Christian and Islamic values are faggot values in the first place, but they'll try to say the rejection of dissexuality is based on Judeo-Christian values in the country. So that's just a societal pressure, but deep down inside, you're just trying to be who you are, and the real conflict is you're scared of what society is going to say about who you truly are. And then people become conflicted, and they think they have to participate in that perverse behavior. In reality, Afuraitkaitnit people have a ka, the soul, a divine consciousness, a deity dwelling in the head region that only directs us towards thoughts, intentions, and actions that are in harmony with divine order. Anytime we engage in anything that's out of harmony with divine order, we get pulled in the head region away from that perverse behavior, those perverse thoughts, ideas, and so forth. That's where conflict comes in because we're disaligning behaviorally with the pull of the kra in the head region towards harmonious thoughts, intentions, and actions, and being pulled in the other direction because the white culture is pulling us in that direction. So we have to deal with reality and transform the minds of the people, or the people themselves have to transform their own identity, their own minds, and understand what has taken place. So we're going to read a quick section because we went over some of this in the previous broadcast, but the key here is using ancestral religion to eradicate the behavior and expel the perverse spirits that try to influence people to continue that behavior. We say, Afuraitkaitnit, Africans, black people have never accepted the spiritually perverse practice of dissexuality, homosexuality. This is true today and is true in ancient times. We always do today and always will recognize the reality that dissexuality, homosexuality is insane. Now, when we get to the other portion down near the middle of the page when we're talking about the movement, we deal with the notion of trauma. We demonstrate that dissexuality, homosexuality, sexual deviance is not within our nature. It always occurs as a superimposition upon our people through various forms of trauma, molestation, rape, torture, propaganda, conditioning, and more. This trauma is born of the whites and their offspring and their culture of disorder. Said trauma can be intergenerational and transcarnational. The negative spirits who seek to superimpose this perversity upon our people as a viable or natural lifestyle choice are the spirits of disorder, the whites and their offspring, as well as those of our people who have become spirits of disorder under the perverse influence of the whites and their offspring. Such individuals negatively influence our people in life through media, quote-unquote, educational institutions, pseudo-religious or pseudo-spiritual institutions, etc. And this is the key, after death, as discarnate, wayward spirits of disorder. For example, the white rapist, so-called slave master who polluted the blood circle of our people 200 years ago by raping one of our great-great-great-great-grandmothers during enslavement is now a discarnate, deceased spirit still hovering around those in that blood circle. If our spiritual immunity is compromised, such a wayward, perverse spirit will constantly seek to implant thoughts, ideas, urges in the children and adults of that blood circle, influencing them towards dissexuality, homosexuality. Such thoughts, ideas, and urges are triggered even more intensely if the child or later adult suffers from molestation, rape, torture, etc. in life. Through that practice of ancestral religion, we engage in ancestral communication. This includes the capacity to repel perverted spirits of rapists, such as the kind mentioned above. Once repelled for good, all thoughts, ideas, desires of dissexuality, homosexuality, experienced since childhood through adulthood are gone, for they were never truly part of the Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, or African black individuals' authentic thought processes, spirit from the beginning. The same is true of the constant propaganda promoted by the whites and their offspring via media, schools, churches, pseudo-philosophy, pseudo-psychology, etc. When we embrace our Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit, or African ancestral religion, which is inherited by us through our blood circles from our direct blood ancestresses and ancestors, we can easily resist and repel the influence of such perverse propaganda. We have an internal capacity to repel any ideas, thoughts, formulations, propaganda projected towards us. We repel it with ease. We also awaken other Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnit as well. Here's the next key, which is why we're dealing with this broadcast tonight. Many Afurakanu, Afuraitkaitnit Africans have eradicated dissexuality, homosexuality through the embrace of ancestral religion, and many millions more will do the same until this cancer promoted by the whites and their offspring is eradicated. It is only a matter of time, and the spirits of disorder have no power to stop it. Now, when we wrote that a couple of years ago, of course, that's always been true, but what has been taking place since that time, that method is first and foremost people who are working to overcome dissexuality. They realize it's a problem. They've been molested, they've been tortured, they've suffered from that propaganda, lured into this kind of behavior, and then once they engage in that behavior, all it takes is one time for some male to touch another male, one time for a female to touch another female, and from that point on, whether they're a child or adult or whatever, going through that torture, trauma, molestation, rape, whatever it is, from that point on, they're confused because they believe, number one, that if it happened to them, it must have been something about them that drew the male to them or the female to them. So it must be something, because the whites and offspring plant that seed in the mind early on. It must be something wrong with them, or else they wouldn't have gone to them. They would have went to some other kid or some other adult and so forth. So now they believe that there's intrinsically, it must be something wrong with them. And it happened to them, so now they have engaged, even though it's against their will, they have participated forcibly into a dissexual activity. Now they believe that they are in some way dissexual. Their spiritual immunity has been compromised. Now they're concerned and they're worried and they're stressed. When you're concerned, worried, and stressed, just in general, that stress leads to a depression with regard to your immunity. There's a weakening of the immunity, a compromising of the immunity. Physiologically, stress leads to a compromise of the immune system, and then, of course, microbes and other things that would normally bounce right off of you and be repelled by your immune system, they can get in and make you ill and so forth. So when you begin to engage in fear, worry, self-destructive depression and things like that, you begin to suppress your immunity. And now not only can parasites, physiologically, microbes and so forth, enter into the system and work their way through and cause a problem, discarnate parasites, discarnate individuals can compromise your spiritual immunity, and they see the breaches in your spiritual immunity, in your spirit body, in your kahiba, your aura, and so forth, and they can attach themselves like a leech attaches itself to an animal and so forth. So they see you depressed, they see you're weak, they see you, suffering and so forth, and you're open, your aura becomes porous, there are wide openings in the aura, they attach themselves to you, and they begin to plant suggestions and thoughts and so forth in your mindset. Then you start having these perverse thoughts of, well, the reason why this happened is because you're really a homosexual. The reason why this happened is this is who you truly are. You need to embrace who you truly are. You need to go and engage in this kind of disordered behavior. This is like the discarnate slave master rapist, or if there was a male who was an alcoholic or drug addict who was a child molester, and that child molester died or was killed and so forth, his spirit separates from the body. He's still earthbound, hanging around the house or the place that he was killed and so forth. He's still around certain family members, and he will come in dreams as well as throughout the course of the day, doing the same thing he did when he was alive, trying to coerce the child or the individual, even if they've grown up and they're still disordered mentally, trying to plant thoughts and ideas and urges into the person. They will put the pressure of their spirit, that electromagnetic energy of their spirit body, put the pressure on the person and try to push them towards someone of the same sex. And when they get near someone of the opposite sex, they will try to get in between that and push them away. So just like you have two magnets on a table, if you put one magnet near another one where the same polarities are facing, before they even touch, they will repel one another, and one magnet will push the other one across the table. Just by virtue of the fact that an ancestral spirit, including a discarnate, perverse, deceased spirit, is an entity, a living entity that has a spirit body. It has some residual electromagnetic energy which can be felt. Of course, people are clairvoyant and clairaudient and clairsentient, can feel an ancestral spirit in the room or a discarnate spirit of a non-relative in the room. That electromagnetic energy, if they get near you, you can feel that push. If you're not very receptive, you just feel urges. They will try to push you towards the same sex. When you get near the opposite sex, they'll try to push you away from that. They do that from the time certain kids are children. So a child will say, ever since I was a child, I always felt pushed towards the same sex and pushed away from the opposite sex, and I never understood it, but I always felt this even when I was 3, 4, and 5 years old. They did feel that when they were 3, 4, and 5 years old. If the child molester was alive, standing in front of them and grabbed them and pushed them towards somebody of the same sex and forced them to hug each other, they know exactly what's happening because a criminal is standing there doing that. If that individual is deceased and the spirit of that discarnate, perverse individual is standing there and pushing the child towards another child and then creating some pain or discomfort if the child starts thinking about, or even an adult starts thinking about somebody of the opposite sex, and all of a sudden they have a negative feeling within their spirit body, they will say from childhood through adulthood, every time I thought about the same sex, I was pushed towards it, I didn't understand it. But when I thought about being with someone of the opposite sex, I felt a very negative feeling and I was pulled away from it. They did experience that because these perverse molesters, whether they were family members or some of these discarnate white rapists, whether they were slave masters or even people who were engaged in interracial couplings since then, they have a grandparent who screwed a cracker and their grandparent was white and so forth, a great-grandparent. That deceased cracker will try to influence the children all the way through adulthood. Here's the key with regard to ancestral religion. This is how the whites and offspring get our people. Because if they get you involved in Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and so forth, or pseudo-spirituality, or just secularism, or atheism, and so forth, when you begin to have these kinds of perverse urges, even before some molestation event happens, when you have certain perverse urges as a child, or even if it didn't happen in childhood, waited until adulthood because you going through some traumatic experience, you became stressed, you suppressed your immunity, your spiritual immunity is compromised, and now these discarnate spirits who are hanging around can put that pressure on you and start flooding your thoughts with dissexual ideas, flooding your dreams with that. When you're going to work and going to different places, you're being pushed in these different directions. What happens in ancestral religion is, when you're involved in ancestral religion, any time you have a perverse thought, idea, desire, your first response when you practice ancestral way of living, our first response is not, why am I having this thought? That's not your first response. Your response is not, why am I having this thought? Your first response is, who is making me have this thought? Because we know that's not part of our kayet, akrawa. Any perverse thought, idea that manifests and is intense and so forth, we know that has nothing to do with us because we know who we are. We know who the deities are who govern us. We know who the Nananoman Samanfo, the spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors are. So if a perverse thought manifests, we instantaneously understand that it's coming from a discarnate spirit. Unless somebody is talking about a memory or an idea where they were programmed to believe a certain thing since they were a kid, and every time something happens, it triggers a old memory and a response, and they start, having anxiety attacks and things like that because of an experience they went through. But we're talking about when someone has some perverse thought about dissexuality, homosexuality, or any other perverse thought, when you practice ancestral culture, whether it's hoodoo, juju, akan, yoruba, whatever it is, you instantaneously understand this is not my formulation. It has to be coming from outside. And then we immediately engage the ritual process with regard to ancestral religion, going to the ancestral shrine to communicate with our Nsamanfo to find out where's the spirit coming from. So when they try to denigrate our practices and say, well, these people are always talking about negative spirits and evil spirits and this and that. They try to denigrate that and make it seem like it's superstitious because they know that once we get back involved with that, we can identify easily these spirits are trying to force us into dissexuality or force us to look towards addiction to alcohol or addiction to other drugs and so forth, or engage in criminal-type behavior like theft and everything else. Just like you have criminals in the community who try to lure a kid, hey, you want to sell some drugs and make some money? Hey, you want to engage in prostitution? Hey, you want to rob this individual or do this? You have people who are trying to get you involved, sometimes forcibly trying to make you get involved in criminal activity. When those people die, they are exactly the same way. The only difference is they are not visible. So when they're projecting those thoughts on you as a discarnate spirit, you assume that you have developed all of a sudden this overwhelming desire to sell drugs, the overwhelming desire to steal from somebody, the overwhelming desire to engage in criminality, the overwhelming desire to engage in dissexuality and so forth. When you practice ancestral religion, instantaneously you know, oh, this is not me, so we're going to find out who this is, who sent this spirit, where they come from, and we're going to get rid of them. Go to the ancestral shrine, go to a priest or priestess, hoodoo man, hoodoo woman. They find out who the spirit is. They can see the spirit standing there. They repel them, and it's over. Within 15 minutes, it's done. No more thoughts or desires about this criminal-type behavior, lusts for dissexuality, and so forth. But if you don't practice ancestral religion, you assume that these thoughts must be your own thoughts. You assume they must be your own desires. Then you go to a therapist, or you go to a counselor, you go to somebody who's older, go to some educator, go to watch some video, watch some movie, read some book, all of these things written and promoted by the whites and their offspring, and their agenda descends upon you because everybody's saying the same thing. Well, if you have these thoughts and desires, you must, deep down inside, this must be who you truly are. So therefore, you need to embrace who you are, and until you embrace who you are, you're always going to be plagued and you're always going to be suffering. And the only way to stop suffering is to fully embrace who you are and just be who you are. And then some of our people go along with that. Some of our people go along with it. They're always in a dilemma. and they start doing drugs or doing alcohol, or they try to figure out different ways to compensate from the fact that internally they have a dilemma against this, and they're depressed all along, but sometimes they try to overcompensate by being extra gay and extra flamboyant and extra this, extra that, extra manly if they're a female, trying to prove to everybody, oh, no, this is what I'm doing. And this is for those individuals, even those who have never been physically molested. Now, when people have been physically molested, it's much easier for a discarnate spirit to descend upon them, because as soon as the physical molestation happens, that's trauma and stress. And once this trauma and stress is manifested and the kid is stressed, or if a woman has been raped or beaten by a male or a series of males in negative relationships, and they're constantly being tortured and so forth, and every male they come in contact with, at first everything is fine, and then they end up being in a very abusive relationship. And then, of course, the white culture descends on them and starts trying to promote these ideas that they need to be embracing dissexuality. And this is why they keep coming in contact with individuals like that. And the discarnate spirits begin to descend on them as well, because they are suffering, they're going through stress, they suppress their immunity. Now they're open to receive not only physically parasites, but those spiritual parasites that begin to enter. The criminals who are in the family, who are deceased now, who are criminals, who are rapists, who are pedophiles, who are molesters, thieves, drug addicts, and so forth, as well as discarnate non-relatives who are the same thing. It's no different than if you're walking down the street, you see a homeless person who was somebody who was, imprisoned for child molestation for 20 years. He gets out, he's on the street, homeless, alcoholic, drug addict, sitting on the street. Sometimes you walk by, they try to say something to you, try to yell at you, or try to influence you, not only for money, but sometimes yelling out some sexual thing, or try to walk up on you and so forth, and you knock them back or whatever it is. When that person dies and their spirit is still hanging around that street where they died, every time you walk by, you have a very negative pressure and so forth, because that spirit is still trying to lash out, still trying to put pressure on the individual who walks by, still trying to put pressure on individuals, just like we talk about if someone was jumped off of a bridge and committed suicide, and their spirit is still hanging around that bridge after they jumped. Every time someone walks across that bridge when they're on their way to work or on their way to lunch, on a lunch break and so forth, as soon as they pass that spirit, they pick up on that depressed spirit's mindset, and they have this overwhelming feeling that they want to jump and commit suicide. They're picking up on the depressed energy coming from that spirit who's still suffering from what he or she did. And then when they go home, they start telling their husband or their wife, every time I walk across the bridge, across the river, I feel like I want to jump. Maybe I'm not as happy as I thought I was, and then they get into therapy for years and also the stupid nonsense, and they're given, medication, and the psychologist pats themselves on the back believing that their therapy is helping them out. And in reality, if they were practicing ancestral religion, as soon as they have the thought of suicide, they don't say, why am I having that thought? They'll say, who is giving me that thought? They tell the priest or priestess, or they go to the ancestral shrine. They say, oh, it's a spirit over there hanging by the river, and somebody who's clairvoyant can see the spirit, describe the spirit, tell them what the spirit looks like, communicate with them, and the person's like, oh, this was never me in the first place, and there's no problem, there's no emotional distress. It's simple. The same is true when you have people who've been molested, physically molested and so forth. That makes them depressed, that makes them stressed, that suppresses their immunity. Then the discarnate spirits who are criminal can get in and start constantly putting these thoughts and ideas of dissexual activity, dreams of dissexual activity, pushing them towards the same sex, pulling them away from the opposite sex, all throughout their childhood, all throughout their adulthood and so forth. And the person engages in that activity because once they share that with other people, they say, well, you just need to embrace who you are and involve yourself in that activity, and then they let somebody do something to them, and then they really believe, like, well, there's no turning back now. I've done it. This is who I am. Nobody's going to accept me any other way. And then they engage in that. The whites and their offspring's propaganda perpetuates it, because every time they start doubting, well, maybe I need to stop doing this, the whites and their offspring's propaganda descends on them like criminal parasites, like piranhas, no, how dare you think about not being a dissexual. You notice how angry white people get when somebody says there's a such thing as homosexual gay conversion therapy, where you can no longer be engaged in dissexuality, or certain churches talking about they can pray away the homosexual demonic spirits and so forth. And in those black churches, they know instinctively that that's accurate, even though they're in Christianity and then they're in a silly pseudo-cosmology and believing that a white character, Jesus, is helping them expel a spirit. Those black people who come from a hoodoo tradition, juju tradition, and so forth, know instinctively that if a black person is thinking about being a homo, they'll say, well, it's a demonic spirit, but they don't know any other language to contextualize it. And they start praying, but what they're really doing is trying to evoke their ancestresses and ancestors, and the deities repel that spirit. But they'll say, well, we're going to call on the Holy Spirit and get that demonic spirit out the body of this person, and the person, sometimes it works. But they attribute it working through the Holy Spirit or the Jesus character. It was really an ancestor or an ancestor, so one of the abosom governing the person. So instinctively, the black people know there's something up here. This is not really who the person is. It's a quote-unquote demonic spirit, meaning a perverse, discarnate, wayward spirit of disorder. So we need to do something about that spirit, and then the person will be all right. They know that instinctively because that's the tradition we come from. But then it becomes corrupt through the church tradition. But when we have that, then, of course, the whites and their offspring go crazy online, on the news, talk shows, whatever. They start trying to denigrate anybody who says they can eradicate dissexuality, because when they see that's the reason they go crazy, because they know if that catches on, their agenda is over. Everything they've worked for decades to brainwash our people with that agenda, to destroy our families, is over in an instant when people return to ancestral religion and know they can eradicate dissexuality, homosexuality immediately. Anybody who's engaged in that practice, whether they became engaged when they were an adult or engaged when they were a child through molestation or whatever, if they've been doing that for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, they can stop that instantly and permanently through the practice of ancestral religion. Instantly and permanently. That's the worst case scenario for the whites and their offspring, the akyiwadefo, the spirits of disorder, because that destroys everything they've worked for to brainwash our people intergenerationally for the past 30, 40 years, trying to plant this dissexual, homosexual agenda in our people. That's why what we put forward is so dangerous, because we have the Coco Bowl book. Our people download the book for free. And then we have the two broadcasts, the Coco Bowl movement, talking about this information in detail. We have two parts to that, as well as the other broadcast going in detail, dissecting the book in detail, so people can read the book. They get reoriented consciously, understanding that dissexuality, homosexuality is insane. There's a divine prohibition. And even when you're reading the book, for example, the divine prohibition against dissexuality, the first article in the book is talking about the particular, one of the so-called 42 enunciations of Ma'at. And, of course, what the enunciations are talking about, and we're not going to go through the whole specific text, but if you look on page 2 and page 3 in the Coco Bowl book, we're talking about the 42 enunciations of Ma'at, and one of them, and we show the actual Medutu for this, and it starts on page 2, and if you scroll down, it gets to page 3. Actually, 3 and through page, let me pull this back up. I want to make sure the page is right. Really 2 through page 4. So if you look at the Coco Bowl book on our website, download the whole book, that section, that one of the 42 enunciations of Ma'at is talking about, the text itself says, Hel Kederti, which is a divinity, coming forth from the land of the west, not have I copulated with a copulated, meaning engaged in this sexual activity. Every one of the 42 enunciations of Ma'at, these are not 42 laws that people just recited in the morning and evening saying, I didn't do this and I didn't do that. They are invocations of 42 deities. The first section is the invocation of the divinity. This particular divinity is Eradicating, the one who's coming forth from the land of the West. When you invoke that divinity, you align your spirit with that divinity. Just like when we go to our shrines and invoke these abosom, these Orisha Vodou, when we invoke them ritually, through ritual prayer, ritual song, ritual dance, and so forth, pouring libation and giving offerings, and we invoke them through ritual, we magnify their power, we align our spirits with theirs through ritual invocation, so we can communicate with them, so we can harmonize our spirit bodies and our energy with theirs. That's what the invocation is. So when it says, Kereti, or Hail Kereti, one who is coming forth from the land of the West, he just invoked the divinity. Just like if I went to a shrine and invoked the divinity Awusi, that divinity can show up and take up residence in the shrine so I could fuse my energy with his, so I can be guided by him. Then it says, not have I copulated with a copulator, penetrated a penetrator, engaged in dissexuality. He aligned with the divinity. This is in this particular scene, it's talking about the weighing of the heart and so forth, and showing each divinity, each one of the 42 divinities, you invoke each one, go before each one, just like when you come into the house of an Akan person, come into a house of a Yoruba person, come into the house of someone practicing Vodou, and they have shrines in the house. We come home, this is adults as well as children, we come in the house, close the door, take off our coats and so forth, take off our shoes. The first thing we do is go to the shrines and salute them, because this is not just your house. This is the house of the ancestresses and ancestors who are seated in this house. And if you have shrines for deities, Aboso, Marisha, and so forth, it's their house as well. So you don't just come in the house and sit down, or come in the house and check your mail, or come in the house and start cooking or get on the phone and so forth. The first thing you do when you remove your coat and remove your shoes is go straight to the shrines and salute them. Just like if your great-grandparents were sitting in the house, sitting in the living room, you wouldn't come in the house and just walk right by and go in another room and start. You would salute, you would greet them first, because they are here and they're actually helping to maintain the integrity and the safety of the dwelling. So the first thing we do, taking off the shoes, you go to the shrine. You invoke them or salute them, and then you go about your business. That's just every day. Every time you leave the house, every time you come back in, if you've gone for a long period of time, every time. If you leave the house 2 or 3 times, when you come back home 2 or 3 times, every time you come in, you salute the shrines first, and then you go about your business, get on the phone, do whatever you're doing. That's just regular. But then if you are engaged in ritual practice, you're engaged in the practice of communicating with them, Samaso, giving offerings and so forth, invoking them through ritual prayer or ritual chant or ritual song, ritual dance, ritual drumming, whatever you're engaged in, because it's time to invoke them, to communicate with them, to learn from them, to get healing from them or whatever. The first thing you do is the invocation to bring that spirit forward, that divinity forward, so you can communicate with them and you can fuse your energy and align your energy with theirs. And then you communicate with them and learn what you need to learn from them. In this particular text, they're talking about the 42 enunciations of Ma'at going before these 42 deities, just like we go before different deities, shrines in different homes and so forth, or if it was at a shrine house, a temple, so forth. You go before each divinity, you invoke the divinity ritually, align your spirit with theirs. In this situation, after death, you do the same thing after death that you did during life. During life, you invoke these deities on a regular basis, and you align your spirit with theirs. After death, you do the same thing that you used to do when you were living. Just like we go to the shrines now, of these abosom, these orisha, when we make our transition, we're going to go before these orisha in the spirit realm as well, just as we used to do when we were living in the physical world. And the first time you do it after you make your transition, you go before these 42 divinities, each one at a time, one after the other. Just like you did when you were alive. You go to one shrine. If somebody has a shrine of Obatala in the house and a shrine of Oshun in the house, and you go to Oshun's shrine first, you salute her, and you move over to, or you go to Eshu's shrine at the door first. Very often, Yoruba people have Eshu at the door and so forth. You invoke him there, salute him there, then you go over to Oshun Shrine and salute her there and go to Obatala Shrine. You go from shrine to shrine to salute the spirit or the Abosom and so forth. When you make your transition, you do the same thing. You go from deity to deity to invoke them in the 42 enunciations of Ma'at. This is a ritual practice. First, you invoke the divinity by name and their descriptive title. That provokes the energy of the divinity to come forward, and then you align your spirit with theirs. Once you align your spirit with theirs, then the second part is they search your spirit out to see if you live in harmony with the aspect of creation they govern. Once you align your spirit with theirs through the invocation, by invoking their name, and this one, Kereti, Hail Kereti, coming forth from the land of the west, that's the invocation. The second part is, I have not engaged in dissexuality, copulated with a copulator, and so forth. When you say that after death, they're going to search your spirit. Now that you link your spirit with theirs, they're going to search your spirit to see if that's true. Did you live in harmony with us or not? If you did, then you can move forward to the next divinity. If not, if you can't pass that test, then you're a spirit of disorder, and then you get consumed by Amud, and you become one of these earthbound spirits and so forth. So that's what's happening after death. It's a form of what we do during the lifetime. But the key part is here when it says, I have not copulated with the copulator. I have not engaged. It's akereti per im amenset an nuk, which means I have not, have I nuk in nukwo, or copulated with the copulator. That goes back to what we said about ancestral religion. If you're having these 42 invocations throughout your life, and you're going before one of the deities, and this deity shows that the only time you're going into the cave, Kereti means the caves or the caverns. The only time you go into the cavern, the divinity Kereti governs the cavern and the opening of the cavern and going into the cavern. Of course, the cavern for the female is the vagina. That's the opening to the cavern or the cave, and this is why you see the goddess Nut bent over the sky, and she gives birth to the sun. The sun comes out of her cavern and so forth. The word Duat is the land of the ancestral realm. Of course, Duat, you see that opening, of course, going into the darkness, going into the female womb and so forth. You see the word Twat, which is a euphemism for vagina. It comes from the term Twat or Duat from Ancient Kamit. And you see the great mother Nut bent over, and, the gateway to inside of her celestial body with all the stars within inside of her body and so forth. You can see the stars in the sky through her body. The gateway to that is the Duat and all that. So the one who governs the caverns, the opening, the only cavern that you should have been entering into is the female cavern. And Kereti is the divinity that governs the opening of the cavern, governs the opening to that physiological cavern, which is the opening to the vagina, the gateway to the spirit realm. It's the gateway to the spirit realm on earth. It's the gateway to the spirit realm in the female body, because through the vagina is where the uterus is, and that's where an ancestral spirit takes up residence. That's the ancestral realm on a mundane level for the ancestral spirit to enter into so that they can eventually be born. So going into that cavern is where you meet the ancestral spirits in the sperm cell penetrating the ovum and drawing an ancestral spirit into the womb. So the deity that governs the cavern, Kereti, when you evoke him, this is why he's the one that governs that process. Hey, I've not gone into the wrong cavern. I've not copulated with the copulator. He will search out your spirit to see if you're lying or not. If you're telling the truth, then of course you live in harmony with that function in creation. But the fact that we go through these different divinities, and some say I haven't stolen, I haven't lied, I haven't done this, I haven't done that. Deities that govern these different aspects of the creation, these different organs in your body and the great divine body, the supreme being, the various aspects of life, we're showing that we live in harmony with different aspects of creation as we behave and operate it in the world. When you're going through and invoking these divinities on a regular basis, and you're showing them that you have not engaged in this and you align with them throughout the course of your life, therefore, if you're used to invoking Kereti on a regular basis the one who governs the caverns, the opening to the spirit realm, and he only governs proper caverns for you to enter into, whether you're a male, then you enter into the female cavern, you're a female, the male cavern, and so forth, which is the urethra, which is connected to only the male organ should be going through the female organ, and so forth, and the gateway to the sperm cells is the black opening, which is the urethra, which is the black hole, which goes to the seminal vesicles, and this is where the ancestral spirits take up residence in the sperm cells and so forth. That's the cavern as well. So whether you're male or female, which cavern are you connected to? And KOKOBO is the divinity that governs those caverns and decide, make sure people who are going into the right place, because this has to do with the bringing of ancestral spirits back into the world. So if you're used to invoking him throughout the course of your life, showing and aligning with the deity that governs the proper use of these caverns, then as soon as an idea comes in your mind about dissexuality, you know it's not coming from you. You know it's not coming from the deity KOKOBO that you invoke on a regular basis, which you've been invoking since you were a child with your parents, because he's the one that governs the proper caverns. So if you have an idea to go against him and try to get with somebody and go through their cavern, if you're a male trying to go through the male cavern, so to speak, trying to engage in dissexual activity, or a female trying to connect with a female and connect their caverns together, which is disordered, you're going against KOKOBO. So he's not telling you to do that if it shows up in your mindset. Your ancestors and ancestors are not telling you to do that. Inyame or AMANNE and Amen and Ra and Ra'at, they're not telling you to do that. No deity is telling you to do that. So where are these ideas coming from? It can't be coming from the deities. It can't be coming from the ancestral spirits. It can't be coming from your own Ka or Kayat, which is the deity in the head region. It can't be coming from your Ba or Bayat, the divine living energy within you. It must be coming from an outside entity. And that outside entity is a discarnate, wayward, criminal, deceased spirit, because no spirit of order will ever direct you or plant in your mind in a thought, idea, dream, or urge to engage in that dissexual activity. So you know immediately a discarnate spirit is in the room, it's in the vicinity. We need to eradicate that spirit. Instant. That spirit is taken care of, and it's over. Whether it's dissexuality, urges, whether it's urges to steal, urges to engage in criminal killing, murder, because there's justified killing and unjustified killing, whatever it is. When you have perverse thoughts, that means an entity is in the room. That also speaks to the reality that these things have to be, these different 42 enunciations didn't have to do with, some people put forward a stupid argument like, well, why would they have a law unless people were engaged in that activity so much that they had to put a law in place to stop people from doing it? That stupid argument comes from the whites and their offspring. That's what happens with them. When they're engaged in a whole bunch of criminal activity and it causes problems with them and upsets their agenda for society, then they have to put a law in place to stop people from doing it, because otherwise people will keep doing it. In our culture, these are 42 enunciations of Ma'at, not 42 commandments, 42 enunciations of Ma'at. So in this instance, or whether it's an instance dealing with stealing or, lying or whatever it is, what ours is really saying is, normally we never do this. So if these thoughts arise, it must be coming from an outside spirit. The only time these thoughts would arise within our people, when the whites and their offspring invaded, they had that mindset when their people died and so forth, their discarnate spirits are hanging around. Now all of a sudden, our people who normally never had any of these thoughts of dissexuality, now because there are foreign discarnate spirits hanging around earthbound because of invasion, all of a sudden you're walking around and somebody in the family has some perverse thought. Then they go home and say, hey, I had a thought about engaging in dissexual activity with somebody of, the same sex and so forth. And then the parent says, of course that's not coming from the deity, that must be coming from one of these discarnate spirits, so let's find out who that is. Go to the shrine, investigate it, find out who it is. Of course it's one of those deceased crackers, you repel the spirit. Nobody in the community was engaged in dissexuality, but the thought arose because a discarnate spirit came forward. our culture preempted it before we could even engage in it, because we already had an early warning system that if anything enters your mind that's out of harmony with order, it must be coming from another source, because your ka or kayet will never produce that. So we weren't engaging in it at all. And when the invaders came and when their people died, their spirits were perverse, and they were trying to influence our people. But of course, we had the 42 enunciations of Ma'at in our ritual practices. As soon as those kinds of thoughts rose up, we had an early warning system, and we could repel them right away and neutralize them right away and neutralize those spirits. So it had nothing to do with our people having been engaged in that practice so much that we had to put laws in place. Our people were never engaged in the practice. And then when those thoughts came forward, we were able to recognize it came from a foreign source. That's the key. And of course, people who don't practice ancestral religion, they could never make that connection. The only thing they could think is, if a law is in place, it must be evidence that the behavior had been rampant, so you have to put a law in place to stop it. That means dissexuality must have been happening. That stupid argument is put forward even by so-called conscious black people. You see them posting the kind of nonsense all over social media, trying to prove that dissexuality must have been part of our culture, which is pure stupidity. So all of that is key with regard to destroying that mindset of accepting dissexuality, homosexuality. When we use the book, that's the first step. People read that book and read our book and then download the broadcast where we dissect the entire book in detail. We just looked at one line here, but we dissect the entire book in detail so people have a further understanding. And then the Coco Bowl movement broadcast, two of them, talking about the spiritual discordance that manifests when discarnate spirits seek to interfere, whether they're the spirits of the whites and offspring or criminal deceased relatives and non-relatives in the black community who are perverts and molesters who are trying to put that pressure on a person. We go into detail about that in those broadcasts. So what happens is, and what has happened since we put that out as a method, that people have downloaded the book, studied Coco Bowl, removed that false narrative intellectually of accepting dissexuality and purged that from themselves instantly. Stop engaging in the behavior instantly. Anybody can stop engaging in so-called sexual behavior, dissexual behavior, or even heterosexual behavior. People become celibate all the time. They decide they want to be celibate because they want to fast and become celibate and take control of themselves and so forth. Some people are celibate because they're just not involved with anybody. Some people are celibate for different reasons. But anybody can become celibate at any time in their lives. So whether a person is heterosexual and they decide, I'm going to be celibate for the next year, solar cycle, to purify myself. People do that all the time. Someone engaged in dissexuality, homosexuality, once they read the Coco Bowl book and recognize the reality that dissexuality, homosexuality is insane, the first thing they do instantaneously say, I'm about to become, quote-unquote, celibate. I'm not going to engage in any, quote-unquote, sexual activity, period. That's the first thing. So the behavior is stopped. Dissexuality, homosexuality physically is over from that point on for the rest of their lives. The only thing left is to purge the desires. And then the next phase is they engage ritual practice with their own spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors of their direct blood circle to remove those perverse, disordered spirits of relatives and non-relatives who have come and attached themselves to the individual over these years because their immune system was so suppressed spiritually that they've allowed these leeches to attach to them and influence them on a regular basis. Like somebody moving into a abandoned building where there are a bunch of homeless people who are also drug addicts and so forth, and they develop relationships with these people, and they're always spending time around these people, and they're attached to these people and so forth. You get yourself away from these people and don't let them follow you to, your new neighborhood and so forth. You no longer deal with these people. Get them out of your lives and so forth. Your nsamanfo, and what's happening is people nsamanfo have actually purge those discarnate spirits away from those individuals, and then all of the mental portion, all of the mental ideas and dreams and urges and so forth that they had conditioned themselves to have, and also that came from outside, it ceases because they were never theirs in the first place. So those outside projections cease. So they don't feel that pressure coming from outside from these perverse spirits who are trying to condition them to get involved. So first, they stopped engaging in the physical activity just by becoming celibate. So they stopped, no longer involved in dissexuality. Then on the mental side, they reject and repel the discarnate spirits who have been prompting them and pushing them to engage in that dissexual behavior for years. So that outside pressure is now gone. They stopped that. And then continuing with ancestral religious practice, connecting with their Unsamanfo, they begin to purge away, and then they purge away those conditionings that once they engage in those thoughts, ideas, and memories, and then they saved them in their mindset and kept operating on them. Every time they thought about doing something else, they went back to that old memory and said, well, no, I guess I have to keep doing this. Then they purge those formulations, those crystallized formulations that were in their mindset, those conditionings, and got rid of those. Now they're free, and they're no longer engaged in dissexuality physically nor mentally. They are cured of dissexuality. Through ancestral religion, our people have cured themselves of dissexuality, homosexuality permanently. What we said a couple of years ago is that not only have a number of people done that, we said that at some point, some of those people will begin to come forward and express the fact that they've done it. And that's going to change the game. That's the only thing that will change the game, because protesting against the agenda and just putting out videos and documentaries and stuff like that proving that white people are promoting the agenda, that's good to educate our people with, because we need to know some of our people don't want to believe that crackers would have a whole agenda, a conspiracy. Pretend like that's not happening, but it really is. But once you educate people, you have to have a method to cure people. And the crackers go crazy when you say you can cure dissexuality, homosexuality, because that's the end of their game. So through ancestral religion, our people have cured themselves. And what you're going to see now is people coming forward and showing how they did that, and developing whole movements around the fact that they have cured themselves and showing other people how to do the same thing. Now, before we go forward, there's about 2 minutes left in the broadcast as far as online. If you want to listen beyond 11 o'clock, you must call in on the phone line, because if you're not on the phone, once it hits 11 o'clock, those listening online, the broadcast will cut off. But the people who are on the phone, you'll still be able to hear after 11 o'clock. And we're really not going to go too much longer beyond 11 o'clock. The phone number is 646-787-8155. 646-787-8155. So the only other final piece we would add to that is now that people are coming forward, expressing, people are coming forward and will come forward showing that they've overcome and cured themselves of this perversity through ancestral religion. As we said, they will begin to form their own movements. Some people, of course, naturally, people who have never been engaged in that kind of behavior, even though some of our people have been cured of that, they cured themselves of it. Some sisters who know that a brother who went through trauma molestation was engaged in that style for a while, but then they came back and cured themselves of it. The sisters will be proud of the fact that he did that. But when it comes to saying, okay, well, now I'm ready to get married, they don't want to get married because they would feel a certain kind of way about, what he was doing in the past, which, of course, is understandable. It's the same thing with males. But what will happen is, naturally, that those males who have cured themselves of that behavior, they will connect with females who have cured themselves of that behavior, and they will form unions. They will form marriage unions. And those people will develop movements to promote the curing or the restoration. You have for example, you have straight black pride movement. You have some people forming something like a restored black pride movement where this is a collection of people who have cured themselves, who have united with one another, males and females, and show other people how to cure themselves as well and represent a model for that. They will establish their own organizations. It won't be a question of, okay, if they've cured themselves, can they now join some of the other black nationalist organizations? They will form their own nationalist or, cultural organizations revolving around the fact that they restored themselves based on ancestral religion, and those organizations will be comprised of people who have restored themselves. So they'll have their own movement with their own people connecting together and restoring themselves. So that's the key here. We have the capacity, and our people have already done that. And some of them will begin to come forward, on a regular basis, on a consistent basis, and it will just be exponential. That is the death blow to the dissexual, homosexual agenda. That's the criminal agenda put forward by the whites and their offspring. We have the method, and have always had the method, whether it was dissexuality or drug addiction or whatever it is, within your own ancestral religious practice, the method has always been there. Yes, you can use the Coco Bowl to purify your mindset, but you can do it other ways as well. But it deals with dealing with your direct blood ancestresses and ancestors. And the other final portion is it is not dependent at all on some kind of counseling. Like, for example, we do not do any counseling with regard to that. So do not contact us with regard to that. We do not do any counseling at all with regard to that. And nobody needs counseling with regard to that. The whites and their offspring want you to believe that you have to go through some form of counseling, and of course they want to keep you in that perverse behavior. They want you to believe that there's no way in the world you can ever break free from any of these things. They don't even want you to really believe that you could break free from addictions to drugs and so forth, or alcohol, without counseling. They always want to have their hand in it to control something and make you believe that you're always in recovery and you're never really cured and all this other nonsense. And people who have been in the field of behavioral health, this is what they teach. Well, you never say you're cured, you just say you're in recovery and there's always a possibility to relapse. That's not true. You can cure yourself through your ancestral religious practice, whether it's addictions, whether it's dissexuality, going directly to your own spiritually cultivated ancestresses and ancestors alone without any outside counseling whatsoever. You are in total control. That's the final piece, your own total control. And that's also the piece that the whites and their offspring despise, because they want to be able to control and stop you from doing what you're doing. If you were part of some organization, they would try to figure out a way to infiltrate the organization and try to stop you or shut the organization down. But they can't stop you from going to your own ancestral shrine in your own house and communicating with your own great-great-great-great-grandparents, grandmothers, and grandfathers who will purge these perverse spirits away from you. So that's what we're talking about here. Coco Bowl movement. So when you look on our page, you'll see we have, of course, our book, the Coco Bowl book, showing that dissexuality, homosexuality was never accepted in Ancient Kamit, and just in Afuraitkaitnit in general, and all these different things we're talking about. That book, as well as all of our 29 books, are free downloads from our website. We have the softcover versions as well. This particular book is $10, but our books range between $8 and $11. They're all free downloads because we want to make sure this information for all of our books is too important to hold ransom. So even if people don't have money, they can download it for free. But if people like to support the work we do, then of course they can purchase one or more of the softcover books and so forth. What we also have, so we do that just in general with our books in general. And that's what we've always done with all 29 of the books. And we have on average, about 4,000 of our books downloaded on a monthly basis. The various 29 books, people here and around the world downloading the information for free on a regular basis. And that's that's part of that process. Some people make purchases as well, and we appreciate that because that allows us to continue to publish and do the things that we're doing. But the information is getting out one way or the other. We also created, however, with the KOKOBO movement, is another piece, and you'll see that we have a crowdfunding effort for the KOKOBO movement. We started that a couple of years ago. The purpose of the crowdfunding effort is not only do we give away the free copies of the ebook version, but the KOKOBO movement effort, and we had a couple of presentations in D.C. where we had people come out. We went over this information, went over the information in the book, and like we do with all our presentations, the presentation is free, but then we always give away a free copy of the softcover book to everyone who comes to the presentation. We do that for any presentation we do, whether we're talking about Afuraitkaitnit, the origin of the term Africa, or Kamit and Toro, the Black Nation and Divinity, or AMANNE, Divine Law, Love, and Divine Hate, or any book that we publish, Hoodoo People, or whatever it is. Anytime we do a presentation in any city around the country, number one, it's open to our people only. Number two, we never charge an admissions fee. It's always free and open to our people only. And then three, we always give away a free copy of one of the softcover versions of the book that we are speaking on that day. So we've given away over 1,600 books to people around the country, just giving away free books until we ran out, of course. So we did the same thing specifically with the KOKOBO movement presentation. We did the presentation. We have the books there. We get free presentation. People came out, listened to the presentation. They receive a free book. The crowdfunding effort is designed for us to be able to publish or print out a large quantity of these books, like 5,000 of these books, and then give them out to black people all over the country. It's one thing for people to have, free downloads of the books, but people need to know that the website exists, and they would have had to been plugged in some kind of way, plugged into the fact we have a website and we have broadcasts and we have books and everything else. Most people don't know that. But when you have softcover books that you can give to different people in different cities, and they can just go around and hand these books out to people who know nothing about us or know nothing about the website, and then they receive a free book from somebody and it's going into detail proving that dissexuality never existed in Kamit, and they see the papyri, they see the full-color images from Ancient Kamit, they see the detailed analysis and so forth. It totally destroys everything the whites and their offspring have ever said about dissexuality, homosexuality in one read. That alone. So the people who are engaged in it, it destroys all of their conditioning. People who are not engaged in it, it fortifies and strengthens them, and they teach that to their children. So imagine somebody walking down the street, even now going to some Kwanzaa event or something, or going to the store, and somebody has a table with some books out, and they give away free copies of Coco Bowl, and it's destroying the dissexual, homosexual agenda by giving away free books. Remember, the whites and their offspring, this is what they do. They give away free watchtowers, they give away free Bibles, they give away free Qurans, all of this nonsense. And when we have some information, most of our people will never give away anything for free. They allow the criminal to give away free stuff all day long and indoctrinate our people. But we won't give away any of our stuff for free, so we let the criminals run rampant. And then we hold on to everything we have for some, funds. Of course, we do have to sell products so that we can, survive, but we have to give away something, especially when it's critical information. So for us, we just give away all of the books in the ebook version for free, and then we trust that the people who respect the work we're doing will see the value in the work we're doing, and some of them would like to have a softcover version anyway so they can look through it and highlight it and share it with their children, show it to their children, read it to their children, show it to other people at work, show it to people on the bus, on the train, at the coffee shop, wherever they are, leave free copies with people and so forth. So this is what the crowdfunding effort is. It allows us to print out the books so we can give them away for free, and this is what we've been doing. So we appreciate the people who, contributed to the crowdfunding effort. You'll see that link on the page, and we'll put that link in the chat room. So if you support the work that we're doing, support this crowdfunding effort for Coco Bowl. And, of course, if you would like to receive some books in return for your donation, we can send them to you, of course. And that way you can give those books away to children. If you work with children or, whatever it is, you can share that information with them. If you're going into high schools or you work with people in behavioral health or the so-called justice system or whatever it is, giving this information out for free, we're destroying this fake, false narrative, and we destroy it overnight. Cracker's been working on this for years. And with one book, it destroys everything the person's heard since childhood. And those who have been engaged in that criminal, self-destructive, dissexual process, which is the vast majority of our people who get involved in that death style, is through torture, rape, all kinds of negative activity. You have a very tiny percentage of people who are criminal. They're the type who would engage in molestation and so forth, and they're the type who would turn around and promote it and try to force you to embrace it. They are agents of the whites and their offspring. They're promoting dissexuality, trying to promote the lies, trying to promote it in the community, trying to force it into the minds of our children and so forth. These are criminals, and they're no different than the whites and their offspring. They are our enemies. Everybody in black skin is not our ally. Some of them are our absolute enemies. They're criminals, and we have no dealings with them at all. They need to be exterminated just like the whites and their offspring. But the vast majority of our people who get involved in that perverse death style, they got involved in it because of criminality that happened to them. So those people, on their own, upon their own volition, can go to their own nsamanfo, not seeking any counseling from any group or any individual, but going to their own people, their own nsamanfo, and purifying themselves. And they become the vanguard of the movement against dissexuality because they've proven that they've destroyed it and purified themselves and cured themselves of it. And then they form their own organizations, males and females together, and destroy it. Moving forward, we have those keys within our own ancestral religious culture. So this is what we're talking about. So, again, if you support that movement, we hadn't talked about the movement in a while because we had published so many other different things and we've been focused on so many other different things. But, of course, the Crackers have stepped up their agenda over the past couple of years when we first released this. So it's very important that we're doing this and reigniting this again. And, of course, even within the so-called conscious community, so-called culture community, you have some of these parasites who are agents of the whites and their offspring, infiltrating nationalist groups and infiltrating Pan-Africanist groups and infiltrating, quote-unquote spiritual houses, Yoruba houses, Akan, and so forth, and so-called Kemetic traditions and voodoo and so forth, and trying to bring that white, dissexual, homosexual agenda into these traditions, trying to pervert and infiltrate. When these are our enemies, they only deserve extermination. But then you have other brainwashed individuals who assume that, well, the whites and their offspring must be telling the truth and we can't hate anybody and that's not part of our culture and we must embrace all and all this other nonsense. So they begrudgingly begin to try to embrace the nonsense and try to make excuses for it and try to rationalize it away. We can destroy all of that. So the vast majority of our people are in that camp. And once we purify our people from that camp, of course, those who are criminals, they just need to be exterminated. So we're not even concerned with that. We don't try to transform the criminal agents. They just need to be exterminated. But those of our people, the vast majority, who are trying to rationalize this perversity or trying to ignore this perversity, or some who fell into the perversity, they can cure themselves, and some of them they're already engaged in that process, and they are now coming forward to prove that. This is the death blow to the dissexual, homosexual agenda war of the whites and their offspring. So please support that movement, the Coco Bowl movement, eradicating dissexuality, homosexuality in the Afurakani, Afuraitkaitnit communities through ancestral religion. I'll put the link in the chat room. If you go to our page, you'll see the link on the page as well. And, of course, we can send you some copies of the book as well. Let me put this link in the page. All right. So we're going to take a few questions. We have a few minutes left in the broadcast. We'll take a few questions on the phone line. Okay, Michelle, we're on the phone line. Number 7412. You had a question or comment?
What's up, Brother Quasi? How's it going?
What's up? Good.
Yeah, this is pretty heavy. I've listened to all of the shows on the Coco Bowl movement just over the years, and it seems like every time you do another, broadcast, that there's always something that, you add on, or, it's no two shows seem to be like exactly the same. So I'm always, glad to hear this. I actually want to just bear witness to something, just going on personal, in my life, definitely not having to do with me, but and without going into too much detail, I've seen the mother of my child, who I'm not, with at present, battle with that, going back and forth, with that particular situation in, just in her life. And so much so that when I've actually had numerous dreams where I've seen her like going back and forth, maybe through her workplace or, just wherever she is in her dream. And as she's going to and fro in her dreams, in the dreams that I'm having of her, I'm always, and this is when I find out that, she may be having dealings with, another, individual of the same sex or whatever. And there's always this presence of a blonde head, blue-eyed. This is crazy. It's real. Like a blonde head, blue-eyed, white woman that's kind of like on post, and she doesn't necessarily move. It's like she's there, somewhat like an idol, if you will, like some type of statue, but it's almost like an animated, statue, and she looks like what you would see like in maybe like some type of Greek or Norse mythology or whatever, and you can tell, in the dreams, I can tell that whoever this individual is or whatever this individual is a spirit that is hovering around, hovering around her, hovering around, my son's mother, and it's crazy because also in the dream I see that some of the places that she's, some of the places that also show up in the dream are places where there's like a bunch of Europeans, look like they're like on a hillside or something at what looks like will be one of them old hippie gatherings or whatever, and they're like engaged in all types of, perverse, activities. And this is not the first time that I've seen this in a dream having to do with, with her, but in the most recent one that I had, there was like just this mannequin-like entity that had fleshy type of skin, but it was still almost like a mannequin. It was almost like just, and as I'm looking and I'm paying attention in the dream, I'm like, nah, this is somebody that's actually, this is like a discarnate spirit actually hovering around, my child's, mother. And, I noticed that she's been kind of, just flip-flopping between, 1 minute she's like, I shouldn't be like this, but, I can't be like this for the rest of my life. But then the next minute she's, going full-fledged into another so-called, relationship. And so when you said what you said as far as like disincarnate spirits and so on and so forth, like I'm bearing witness to that as I'm, listening to, the broadcast. And I've also seen her delve into different components or attempt to go into one of our ancestral traditions, but somewhere along the line being turned off from that or really not seeing the value in it, either for one reason or another. Maybe, she's been misled by maybe some of some maybe like some charlatans or some people that weren't necessarily real about the tradition, or there was just like some underhanded stuff going on. But then also because of the infiltration of those type of ideologies into, the culture. And so maybe like in her mind, it's like, well, if I don't have to necessarily be part of this or be part of that, if I can do the same thing without being part of it. You know what I'm saying? So,
right.
Yeah. So I'm just basically bearing witness to what you're talking about, and I mean it's real crazy. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah. I just want to put that out there that sometimes I feel like the part that I need to continue to play in it is just to go deeper into, being more resolute about my ancestral and spiritual practices, and to continue to work with, our child, which is what I do, but to, go ever more deeper, and, just to be on post and be there for her, when or if and when, she feels that pull, just to play my part. I don't know if there's so much that I can do on my end except for what I'm here to do according to my destiny, and to show her support in a harmonious, fashion, without having her think that, hey, I approve of this, because I don't. So, but I don't want to ramble, but I just want to say, like, that's it's real in the field. It's real. Yeah,
I appreciate it, because that's these are the things that most people don't talk about, even though they're happening, they're experiencing these things, and until we say something about it, all of a sudden people they feel comfortable. They say, finally I can express this. Like most people, when they and you're involved in ancestral tradition, as you said, so there's certain things that you know you can talk about, but some of our people, most of our people who have some involvement or some family member who's involved in hoodoo or juju or something like that, they're scared to even talk about that. They're scared to even mention anything about it because everybody else is a Christian. So all the spiritual experiences they have, they suppress, they don't talk about, and until somebody brings it up, and then they release a flood of things that have been happening since they were a child. And it's the same thing with this subject. What you're talking about with seeing that, either a manifestation of that discarnate spirit, or maybe some kind of old shrine that spirit used to use. And either way, whatever it is, that discarnate white criminal type spirit, that's the individual, whether it was a slave mistress or somebody who was part of somebody's life or something, or if it was some discarnate spirit who attached herself to the sister at some point because of a suppressed spiritual immunity, just like a homeless person attaching themselves and following somebody home and they let them come in the house and quote unquote take care of them or something like that. That happens on a regular basis. So that's the key. That's where that perversion is coming from, and that's how it becomes consistent. And what happens is the overriding narrative about dissexuality and what it is and what should be done about it is all coming from the whites and their offspring. And it is not enough, and this is why we have the KOKOBO movement, it is not enough for simply black people to say, hey, this is wrong, this is making me mad, and protest and shake their fist at it. Crackers don't care nothing about that, because they have they've institutionalized it from, childhood through books and videos and everything, all the way through adulthood, through media, through movies, through music videos, through poetry, through television and comedy, which is a major way to infuse it. Comedy shows or comics on morning radio shows or, whatever it is. when you in making people laugh at it and try to make them feel more comfortable with it, or talk about gay friends and try to make jokes about them to make you feel comfortable about accepting that nonsense, crackers have an entire agenda that's institutionalized. So for somebody in our community to just say, hey, that's not right, that's not doing anything. But if we have an institutional approach to overthrow institutionalized oppression, then we can destroy it from an institutional level. So the Coco Bowl book destroys the entire narrative, the entire pseudo-philosophy. So all that convincing people and conditioning intellectually, we can destroy it all. And usually it's something that people have never heard before in their lives. All they ever heard people would say, hey, that's wrong, you're going to go to hell, or something like that, or I'm not going to be around you. That's all they heard from black people as a response. The crackers got all these books and movies and studies and all this other nonsense. But when we come back institutional-wise to destroy it with the, intellectually, just like they've been conditioned intellectually, we have something intellectually to destroy all of that. Then the only thing left is the ritual piece. And once they're alerted to the fact that there's an outside entity engaged in pushing them in that direction, now they have to contemplate and reflect like, damn, it has been something. And then they have the opening to neutralize that criminal spirit and free themselves. And that's something that has never been done. People simply they don't know how to react to the agenda other than exposing the fact that an agenda exists, but they never had an answer to it. So when you bring forward those experiences, it just verifies exactly what's going on and, the method that we have put forward and that people have been engaged in even instinctively to, free themselves and cure themselves of it. But we appreciate that confirmation. And what you're doing is the right thing. You, of course, intensify your own ritual practice because you're dealing with your own function. Of course, you're a child. You intensify that spiritual practice with them, and you're unsamafo protecting the child and protecting them from projections of accepting, perversity. And just like we always say with a tuning fork, once you make one tuning fork oscillate, then the one that's near it will begin to oscillate at the same frequency. So when you're on that vibration of aligning yourself with order every moment of every day, and your child as well, then it will force her. She'll start feeling pressure from that side, even without speaking. She'll be feeling pressure, and her Nsamafo will be working on her Egungun and so forth to begin to push her towards reassessing what's happening. And, of course, you can share with her the Coco Bowl book, email her the ebook version or whatever as well. But, yeah, that's going to help move her in the right direction.
Yeah, that pressure that you speak on is exactly what I told a friend of mine before I actually tuned into the show, and I told him just that. I said if as I become more resolute with my, just with my practices, my daily practices, I wake up every morning and I commune with my Ori, and I set things in order before I even step out the door. And I was telling him today that as I go deeper into this work, that and having our son involved in this work, that the pressure is going to be on her. Which at one point in time she actually did speak to me about how she was speaking to her ancestors as to whether or not she and I should actually, recommit to our relationship and so on and so forth, because we've never been at each other's throats. We've never, been like violent towards each other, arguing and all this, just crazy stuff. But it's like that pull, that struggle that she that she deals with, and I said, well, maybe it's a thing of her, getting mixed messages. She's getting messages from her Egungun, but then it's just like you speak about, divine law and love and divine hatred. Not only do you accept what is correct, but you have to repel what is incorrect. And I think this whole multicultural, we are the world, let's accept everything, makes it hard to be resolute as to which path you're going to go. So it ends up being 1 minute is this, but then the next minute is it's that. So it's like I'll be with you, but I'm not going to necessarily say that being homosexual is. I'm not going to judge that. And I'm like, but see, that's where the problem is going to come in. You know what I'm saying? But that's not,
right.
Like you said, it's not something that you can talk to that person about from an intellectual standpoint without doing the hardcore spiritual work to move the energy. And so I realized that I have more of a chance of affecting change by going deep into, my being to clear out whatever garbage that I need to get rid of, so that when I show up at every turn, that it is resolute, it is beyond a shadow of a doubt that this brother is about his business, and that, like, if I engage with him, I know exactly what I'm getting into, and I trust it because he's helping me to become more in tune with my egungun and my ori and so on and so forth. So I can't do it for selfish gain just because I appreciate her or I still have, feelings or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Because when we're together, we do good. But again, if we don't have that foundation of ancestral culture, religion, and wisdom, then as the ebb and flow of life and influences around us come and go, if you're not harnessing and creating that shield, then things that you thought that you had actually overcome can come back and hit you, and then you start doing things to sabotage the relationship that didn't need to be sabotaged. Right. Based on I'm 100% with you. Mm-hmm.
And one thing I would also add is that when you're engaged in that process, ritually fortifying yourself as well as your son, and when those things come up with her, when she's talking about, I'm communicating with my egungun and so forth, reminding not only your son but also her about the difference between the egun and the egungun. Mm-hmm. And you have, just like in Akan, you have the Asaman for the Nsaman for the, deceased spirit. You have Nsamanfo Bani, which are evil deceased spirits that are operating in disorder. They were criminal types when they were here, and they're still the same way there. You have Nsamanfo Pa, which are nice people who die like grandparents and so forth. But then you have the Nananom Nsamanfo, who are the spiritually cultivated ancestors and ancestors who mastered life. Those are the Egungun. Those are the ones who you follow for direction. Of course, you don't follow the evil ones, so any spirit that communicates, even if it's a relative, you have to make the assessment, is this one of the spiritually cultivated ones or not? And when you evoke them ritually, you're only seeking to evoke those who are the spiritually cultivated class. Number one, of course not the evil ones, but even those in between, the ones who were just nice people. They were grandparents, great-grandparents, aunts, uncles. They made the transition. They were nice when they were alive, but they weren't necessarily spiritually cultivated. Those are the ones who could cause some problems inadvertently, because if they see somebody suffering, just like when they were here, if they see you suffering, going through some negative relationship, a woman going through negative relationships, a string of them with a man, and then they see she gets with a man who's not really the person she needs to be with, but he's not, abusive, they're like, well, just go ahead and be with him because you don't want to be alone, and I just don't want to see you suffer no more. And they will push you towards something that you really shouldn't be engaged in, because they don't really have the proper, mindset as well. They're just trying to placate what's going on at the moment, but they don't understand the ramifications of, that decision spiritually. And it's the same thing. Mm-hmm. Some of them would be like, well, if, you need to be with this person, they're the same sex, but they make you happy, you're not suffering anymore. Just do whatever makes you feel good as long as you're not suffering. Those kind of spirits who are just regular people who died, they're not, malicious trying to get people killed or something or hooked on drugs, but they were brainwashed. They were ignorant when they were here, and they're still on that same mindset. So she needs to know the difference between them. Just be reminded of the egungun. Those are the ones you're evoking. If somebody is giving you information that's not in alignment with that, then they are misguided as well. Just because they're nice doesn't mean they're not misguided. Just because a grandmother is very nice and takes care of you when you're sick and everything else, doesn't mean that when she goes to the hairdresser and straightens out her hair and tells you that God is a white man and you need to pray to him, as long as you live in harmony and you're clean and, upstanding, then you'll be a good person and everything works out. She's still teaching you self-hatred because she thinks God is a white man and telling you don't stay in the sun too long and make sure as soon as that new growth shows up to, burn it. You know what I'm saying? She's not doing it maliciously. It's out of brainwashing. It's out of her own self-hatred. They're not the ones to seek spiritual guidance and make decisions about what path you should take because they can't perceive properly the ramifications undergirding the decisions that they're proffering for the person. So she needs to know it's the egungun, the spiritually cultivated ones, who we receive direction from, not the others.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Definitely. Thanks for the dialogue and the feedback and the insight. I'm gonna continue doing. Just continue pushing forward. And I'm gonna definitely share this. And I'm definitely sharing this. All right. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Okay. I appreciate the call.
All right.
Okay, so we have a couple more calls. Michelle on the phone line, number 0344. You had a question or comment? Number 0344 on the phone line. Okay, number 2081. You had a question or comment?
Yes. What's up, Quasi? One of my questions. In means of copulation, in that term, when it means copulation, in general, it doesn't really deal with a certain brand of sex. It means copulation. I have not copulated with a copulate. Means like with a man, and woman. Because I didn't know that women could what they said, copulate with a copulary.
Right. In that sense, it's the Nook, and of course it's showing that this was the papyrus of Ani, and it was a male, so they were talking about specific things, but that's why we put penetrator / copulatory, talking about engaged in sexual activity. So Nook means the fusion of male and female copulation. So someone trying to be engaged in sexual activity. So when it says an Nook, meaning not have I copulated with a copulator or penetrated or penetrated, really meaning not tried to engage in sexual activity with someone who has the same sexual apparatus that I do.
Okay. And another thing, there was something important you brought up because I've been hearing the same argument in the groups that they said that, when people go back and they sit there and say people from ancient times so that they participate in certain disgruntled disorder fashion. And for their laws, they said because there was laws and there were certain rules put in place that they feel what our people did back then was already in a degenerate state. Now, tell me, does that sound kind of weird or odd that someone that doesn't really understand the language, but don't really understand the real reason, why would even our answer would put that, or unless they already knew that this is something that was a possibility and they put it as a reminder? I'm sure you can clarify on that.
Yeah, people making these comments, these are people who still have a Eurocentric approach to, examining behavior and examining, social structures and examining laws that we put forward and, the way we govern ourselves and the way we operate, because it's not based out of a ancestral religious perspective. The exact same deities that, the same sun shines on us that's shone on our people, thousands of years ago, the same moon, same black substance of space. We're still on the same earth mother, the same atmosphere, the same oceans and rivers and mountains and so forth, and the same spirits that animate the sun and the different planets and the stars and the earth mother and the oceans and atmosphere and thunder and lightning are the same ones, and we still communicate with them. We're still impacted by them physically and spiritually. We still communicate with them. They have not changed. So when they direct us what's in harmony with the order of creation, when they did that in the past, they do that with our people today. So we know how to align with them. They're still operant. They're still conscious, of course. We communicate with them. They still possess us. So we know what's going on. So this is a living, breathing tradition. And divine law hasn't changed. When people start talking about what happened in the past and they must have been in a degenerate state, that's nonsensical. They're talking out of Eurocentric understanding. This is why we talked about the fact that when you're talking about the 42 enunciations of Ma'at, you're invoking 42 deities that you communicate with. So when you're communicating, for example, with Kerekti and talking about not going into the wrong caverns and so forth, you're talking to a divinity and aligning with a force in nature that aligns you with a certain kind of behavior. So any idea that enters your consciousness that's out of harmony with the proper behavior, then we instantaneously know that it's coming from somewhere else. And that's why we had laws against it. It wasn't because we were engaged in the behavior. It's because sometimes spiritual agencies try to impact you, and these laws are put forward just in case this weird thought shows up, even though you've never engaged in it. This is a way to preempt you from ever engaging in it in the first place. Because if the thought shows up, that means it was coming from outside of your blood circle in the first place. So we could preempt people from ever engaging with for the very first time in a behavior by putting the law forward first. Whites and offspring can't conceive of that. They can't conceive of putting a law forward first before somebody even started engaging in the behavior. They put laws forward after people have done a lot of damage, and then they're trying to clean up. So they put the laws forward so it doesn't continue happening at the same rate. For us, very often, we will put forth the divine cosmology and the laws that govern that, which stream from our interfacing with the deities who govern that aspect of creation. And therefore, we preempt negative behaviors before they even manifest. People who don't practice ancestral religion can't even conceive of that reality and the way we structure our societies based on these laws and rules and so forth. So that's the difference.
All right, and one last question. You did a broadcast in regards to maturity. And certain ages, people start to reach a sense level of maturity, I guess, mentally or developmental in their brains. I'm not sure. I think there was one particular documentary, and somebody did it, and they got the same study from a cracker, I must say, of some age of 25. People get certain cognitive, I guess, maturity of their actions. But I think for your broadcast, I think you said it's longer. Is there somewhere in one of your PDF books that explains that more properly to go back and look at, if possible?
No, in fact, I saw your email. I was going to send it to you, respond. That's going to come. Okay. We're going to publish that in the upcoming book. We just did the broadcast because we wanted to put the information out first. So, sometimes we'll put the information out first and then we'll publish the book later. But we just wanted to get it out now. But, yeah, that will be coming up in a future publication. At some point, as a matter of fact, this year, 13,018, we'll include that in one of our upcoming books.
Okay. I guess you answered all my questions. The only thing I would say, the only other issue is, let's say I want to purchase certain publications, including that one. They're all priced differently, so I might start buying books from you in this year that's already existing right now. To start having some hard copies.
Okay. Yeah, just let me know. Just send me an email. Let me know, how you want to structure it. Yeah, we can do that.
All right. Thank you. Madase.
Okay. We appreciate the call. Okay. We have one more call on the phone line. Michelle, number 3011. You had a question or comment?
Yeah. Michelle Kwesi. Thank you for entertaining my question. All right. Well, I just wanted to just share a little bit on what the brothers are saying, that about the age difference. The more that I'm learning more about my culture, is more that I'm identifying who actually, like, what entities are approaching. Because this past week, dealing with people who were talking about, before I used to experience spirits that used to lay on my chest, and they were calling them succubus and Adam's wife, Lilith, and all that type of stuff. And
right,
from me doing my more going into my culture, is that I got identified that they were dealing with unknown entities, negative entities, because our divinities and our deities, they do no evil. They don't do any wrong, or all they do is good. So he wasn't talking about Atomet. So I mentioned to them about that, about what I've covered over my journeys of studying my culture, that was a fallacy that they were talking about. Not that they didn't experience actually a spirit, trying to possess them or control them, because they woke up with scratch marks on their wrists. And I actually one time woke up with, like he said, like the brother said, like a white entity that was on my chest, so those spirits are real. And the other thing that I was speaking on, from different generation to generation, was that it seemed as though that the plight is to use the youth to attack us with, the misinformation is if they project that disharmony or that disunity towards the youth, and not only towards the youth. I, growing up, had that promiscuity as well, from being immature and an adolescent, that I was making wrong decisions. But now it's laughed at that if you don't get with two girls, or you don't mess with two girls, or that's not the right behavior, you're supposed to be trying to go for the girls, you're considered to be gay, and then now you're being attacked. Or that's like attacking a tree. Tree doesn't do anything, but you attack a tree because you saying the tree is gay, and then the tree can't defend itself, so you try to cut down the tree. So I'm experiencing that a little bit, going on right now. And then also, me and you spoke on before about one of the older so-called priestess in not Yoruba religion. I came in, they had the Etu statue, the Etu shrine, and made greetings, made peace to the Etu shrine, but the antics used on doing that didn't make me feel comfortable. And then when I got into, they were trying to convert station. They were using convert station to try to tell me that, we're not born with a predetermined gender, with a gender beforehand that is discovered when we get here, or it wasn't determined then, and it was misdirected when we got. It was misdirected before we got here, and we corrected it when we get here. That was a fallacy within itself as well. So all what I was saying is I'm just attesting to the fact that the more that I read, the more that I learn about my culture, like you said, with AMANNE, and also the Barima, that you spoke about, this psychosexual warfare that's going on. And the reason why that I feel that is going on, because they don't want you to call on the unity of the duality of the ancestors. They don't want you to use your male warriors and then your female warriors, or your male deities, divinities, and your female divinities. They want you to be half armed, so you can't. So it'll be difficult for you to defeat some of those challenges that are brought against you, or some of those influences. That's just want to speak. Oh yeah, and then also going in to say that they did that, they're saying that may be used as a way to deter you from going through those enunciations or attesting to those enunciations, because, like you said, you committed a perversion before, so now you can't redeem yourself. Now you can't return home. It's just a way of distracting you from returning to your natural place or your inherited place of being or trying to be in divine order. Does that make any? I mean, am I?
No, that does. It makes perfect sense. As a matter of fact, everything you were saying when you're talking about noticing the difference between what they would call succubus and incubus and all of that, and Lilith and all this nonsense and so forth, people having those experiences. In fact, it's funny you mentioned that, because I was going to post something on Facebook, part of an article, which will become part of a broadcast talking about unexplained, marks found on the body. We're going to do something on that. I was going to post that a couple of weeks ago, but I didn't. I was focused on something else, and I ended up putting it, on the back burner. But yes, people do have those experiences. Of course, if you're dealing with, certain pseudo-religious practices, some will say it's all superstition. Others have, like you're talking about Adam and Lilith and all this other nonsense, pseudo-esoteric people, or people dealing with the Kabbalah or Sufism or Gnosticism, something like that, or some pseudo, Wicca or something like that. They'll try to make up different things. Very often it is, some discarnate spirit of a relative or a non-relative trying to put pressure on you, trying to control you. And you can tell the difference. If it's something very negative, it's a negative spirit, and the more we engage in ritual practice, we can tell the difference between the kind of energy, the emanations coming from an ancestral spirit, that's harmonious, or, one of the Yabosom, or, a spirit that's disharmonious. Every now and then you'll have some kind of pressure, or someone will have some kind of pressure on them that wakes them up in the sleep state, and they feel like it's a possession. And even though it's uncomfortable, it's not a negative or malicious thing. And sometimes that's a call towards spirit possession with regard to initiation into some form of priesthood or priestesses in the traditional religious practice, like an abosom, the person's abosom that governs them is possessing them, or one of the nsamanfo kind of doing a malpossession, trying to snap the person out of that coma of being engaged in self-destructive behavior and so forth. So the person becomes alarmed in the middle of the night, because, that's the time when the spirit will try to, put a little pressure on them, and it makes them panic a little bit. Then they get up and go to the shrine because they feel that's the only thing they can do to, cool themselves. And then they get that information like, we've been trying to contact you the whole time, but you have not been paying attention. And that's one of the ways they get the attention. But you can tell the difference between that kind of quote-unquote sleep paralysis as opposed to a malicious entity trying to control you. And very often people do have those malicious, discarnate spirits trying to control them, whether it's a relative or a non-relative. And we can properly contextualize that within our ancestral culture. We don't have to look towards, these 6th and 7th books of Moses and all this other nonsense to, or Hermetic texts and all this other nonsense to find out what's real. And it's true, again, what you said about, gender, talking about gender is not presupposed. When you're in the ancestral realm, even before you enter into the womb, you already have your gender. So that nonsense about, the physical body isn't developing into a gender before a certain number of weeks, that's foolishness. Yes, the physical body is developing from a cell, a tiny cell. But by virtue of the fact that you have that feminine energy or masculine energy, it's going to force the body's, stem cells and so forth to manifest in a way where it's a male or a female according to the nature of the spirit. So this if someone tries to say gender isn't determined and they're involved in ancestral religion, you have some Yoruba person or Akan person talking about gender is not determined before you're born, it's not until you get here, then they're contradicting their entire lives because they claim to be communicating with ancestresses and ancestors. And if you're communicating with a female ancestress or a male ancestor, that means gender is determined in the spirit realm before you even get into the womb. So then they're lying. They can't tell you it's not determined and you don't have a gender until you get here, yet they're communicating. They're not communicating with unisex spirits every day. They're communicating with a grandmother or a grandfather or an aunt or an uncle, an ancestress or an ancestor, communicating with a male deity or a female deity. So a lot of these Negroes are, promoting the culture, perverse culture of the whites and their offspring, their ill culture, but some are just brainwashed because they've been brainwashed by their babas and iyas and nanas and, tatas and yayis and everything else. So, but the key, of course, is when we deal with sign ancestral religious reversion, we eradicate all that misinformation. But no, we appreciate you sharing that information.
Yes, Medashe.
Okay, I say that. We appreciate the call. Okay, so we have, it's only a few minutes left in the overtime. Sometimes they give you about an hour worth of overtime before it automatically cuts off. So we're going to end the broadcast here. Once again, if you take a couple of minutes, go to the Coco Bowl movement piece, you'll see that on the website, okyiwadefo.com/Coco Bowl. We posted it in the chat room. We'll post it on our, you'll see the link right here on the broadcast, the channel, blogtalkradio.com/okyiwadefo, the promotion for this particular show, this episode. You'll see the link to the okyiwadefo.com Coco Bowl movement page. We'll post the fundraiser link as well. It's on the page, but the fundraiser link, we'll post it on Facebook as well. It'll take a couple of minutes to go there and contribute to our crowdfunding effort. We're reigniting this Coco Bowl movement with regard to we've always had the movement, and people have been downloading the books for free and transforming themselves and curing themselves of this perversity, and other people who are not involved in it but teaching their children and giving them this intellectual, stand against this misinformation, the disintellectual misinformation coming from the whites and their offspring. But with regard to giving away the free copies of the Coco Bowl book, just imagine, we want to print out like 5,000 up front, but imagine we have hundreds of thousands of these books being given away in cities all over the country to black people and different parts of the world where, of course, the whites and offspring are promoting this dissexual, homosexual agenda all over Afuraitkaitnit, tying it to aid, and so forth, as well as in the Caribbean and Europe and wherever our people are, South America, Central America. Imagine hundreds of thousands of the Coco Bowl book, millions, but starting off with thousands. We're able to hand them out to black children as well as adults wherever we are, just free books, giving them away. That's what will be destructive and is destructive to the dissexual, homosexual agenda war that the whites and offspring are waging. They've always been giving away free pamphlets and books and DVDs and little movies and instructional videos about dissexuality and how to accept it, flooding our people with that. We're never giving away information that destroys that. Our people never get anything free from our own people that destroys these things. We're always getting free misinformation from the whites and their offspring, but nothing from our own people. So we are changing that. We've been doing that for years, and we're going to continue, and we just need the support of the community. So take a few minutes, go to the Coco Bowl movement fundraiser. And again, Yedase, we thank you for tuning into the broadcast. And Yebeshi Abio, we will meet again. That's up.